Long time, and you've actually went out into the mountains and into the areas where the folks had said that they had made a sighting. Now, did you ever stay overnight? Did you ever stay more than one night, or was there like a week excursion where you were out there just doing a constant search, or how do you conduct to gather your evidence and things like that?
Well, it depends on the situation. I have spent significant amounts of time in certain areas and in specific areas where I'll do an initial investigation, and I'll talk with the eyewitnesses. I'll look at the history of the area, go out and drive around the area, try to get a feel for the land, the habitat, the food sources, the water sources, and see if it could possibly provide an area for a Bigfoot to be staying in temporarily. And if I see that there's enough possible evidence to support it, then yeah, I'm going to monitor that area as long as I can. Now, it depends on my work schedule and family schedule and stuff like that, if I can afford the time to spend a long time. But I have spent multiple days, if not weeks. In some cases, I've camped and stayed in areas for, a week, maybe 2 weeks. And of course, going back to supplies and stuff. But yeah, that's the only way you're really going to find anything is to continually look at an area, study that area, because if you just go in one day, say, I looked around the woods and there's no Bigfoot here, and you go home, that's not going to do any justice to the research. You've got to continually look for it, because as you guys know from doing paranormal research, you can't walk into a house the first time and say, there's nothing here, the house isn't haunted, when in fact the activity that particular evening you're there may be kind of dormant or not really much happening. So you have to keep at it, and you have to keep going back, and hopefully you'll yield some good results.
Exactly.
We were just talking about that because I've teamed up with John recently on a couple of paranormal investigations. I mean, that was the same exact thing we were just talking about, wasn't it, John?
Yeah, exactly the same thing. Exactly.
I mean, if you don't, you can't just chalk it up, as a sighting or as paranormal if you don't have conclusive evidence. So I guess my next question is going to be, you talked to, in your 23, 24-year span of doing this, you've talked to probably hundreds of, if not thousands of folks that have done sightings. So out of all of those, what percentage do you say that actually would be substantiated as a significant sighting, as opposed to just people seeing like bears or bobcats or stuff like that?
Well, that's a really hard question to answer, because I wasn't in their shoes and I wasn't at that location when they had their sighting. So right. They could have had a true legitimate sighting. Unless I find physical evidence to support it, I can't say they did or didn't. I can only go by what they tell me.
Okay.
So it's hard to gauge what percentage of the sightings are true legitimate sightings and not. Of course, you have to factor in the possibility of misidentifications of other wildlife hoaxes, people seeing shadows and light play in the forest that could look like something moving through the trees when it's not. There's a lot of different factors that come into play. So you have to rule those out and try to at least do the best you can to rule those out, because, like I said, you're not there when they had their sighting. You're not in their shoes. You didn't see what they saw. So they really could have had a sighting. It just doesn't produce evidence. So you have to go by what they're telling you.
Right.
And I've had my share over the years of folks not being so upfront and credible with their encounter. They're looking for attention or looking for some kind of notoriety or wanting to get their 15 minutes of fame. Mm-hmm. So they may have seen something and they're just not sure what it was, so they kind of embellish and make up details as they go along. I've had plenty of cases like that over the years. But, yeah, it all depends on the eyewitness, where the sighting location happened. There's a lot of factors that really kind of fall into play when it comes to an eyewitness's report.
Now, when you're out there hunting Bigfoot or out there trying to gather evidence, what are some of the things that you do? Like, or people do this scream. I've seen it on the Destination Unknown channel, where there was a prominent Bigfoot or a monster hunter, he called himself. He went out there and he was screaming and making all these sounds and knocking on wood. I mean, what are some of the ways that when you go out there that you try to gather your evidence?
Well, there's a variety of different things that we try. The call blasting through digital predator calls. There are supposed Bigfoot calls that are available online, and other researchers have collected over the years that I've used and tried to broadcast over the digital predator calls. And sometimes we get strange responses and different answers back that we can't identify. Doesn't necessarily mean it's a Bigfoot. It's just some kind of animal responding that we can't positively identify because we didn't see the animal making the sound, obviously. Wood knocking is a communication tool that's thought by many researchers that Bigfoot use to communicate with each other. What it means, we have no idea.
Right.
But it speculate that it's them letting other creatures in the woods know that there are humans there to stay away, or so many knocks equals how many people are in the forest, that kind of thing. And it's all speculation. All of the research right now is speculation until we're able to actually study an animal in its natural environment, its natural habitat, doing what we think it does. And until that happens, it's all we do is we come up with the possible hypothesis and speculate on behaviors and what they do. So we try to, based on what other people have success with, we try to mimic that and use those kind of techniques in the field. Again, the call blasting, the wood knocking, that sort of thing, many researchers use those techniques to try to elicit response calls and elicit wood knocks back to them. And who knows? I mean, there might be another Bigfoot researcher or research group out in the forest that we're knocking back and forth with, and we don't even realize it.
Wow. Yeah, you're absolutely right. I didn't think about that. Yeah, you might have actually people out there that that are doing the same thing that you're doing that not necessarily communicate with you on that, and thinking that they have something, and it's just two human beings, trying to communicate back and forth.
You'd be knocking back and forth at each other all night long.
That's true. Now, I guess the big question, and I know we're almost at the bottom of the hour here, but have you yourself, in your 23 years you've been doing this, have you ever seen a Bigfoot? Or have you ever thought you've seen a Bigfoot?
It's hard to answer because I saw something in 2008 in southeastern Ohio in my high beams for just a split second or two. And when I pulled my vehicle back into the parking spot, whatever I saw was gone. So I can't definitively say what it was, but have I definitely seen a Bigfoot? No. Have possibly seen a Bigfoot? Possibly, yes. What it was, I have no idea. But I've heard a lot of strange calls and screams and howls. I've heard the wood knocks. I've seen the very large footprints. I've seen enough to know that there's something going on out there. And as you mentioned, talking to hundreds of eyewitnesses over the years, I'm convinced there's something to the phenomenon.
Yeah. Have you casted any footprints at all?
Oh, yeah, many.
Nice.
I've casted, I lost count, dozens over the years.
That's awesome.
Some have had definite toes in them where you can definitely tell it was a bare footprint in the ground. Others have looked like large impressions in the ground. And of course, it's conducive to the soil. So if you've got soil that's soft, like mud or sand or very loose soil, of course, you're going to get a much distinct footprint in the ground.
Right.
You're going to be able to see those toes and definitely tell it's foot. In other cases where the ground is hard, a lot of leaf matter and that sort of thing, you may just get large impressions in the ground. So I've casted many footprints over the years of both kinds.
Now, you think, based off of the evidence that you've gathered and all the sightings and maybe even one that you had yourself, do you think that after all these years and with the shrinking of the forest, because man's basically taken over a lot of the forest now. I know there's a lot of mountains out there that haven't been explored and so on and so forth. But you figured by now the population of that particular species would be a lot more than it was 23 years ago. So somebody would had some kind of irrefutable proof. Now, have you ever run into anybody that you've looked at their evidence and went, wow, that there almost is makes me believe that we already believe that there's something out there, we just don't know what it is. But when you look at that evidence, you look at it and you go, wow, that's definitely a Sasquatch or a Bigfoot. Have you ever run into that?
Photograph-wise, video-wise, no. Aside from the Patterson-Gimlin film, which I'm still on the fence about,
Right.
I haven't been really convinced by photos and videos, mainly because some of them that look too good to be true usually are. Some I've found pretty compelling, where I've looked at and scratched my head and said, that has possibilities to it, but nothing that's overwhelmingly convinced me that it's a video or a photograph of a Bigfoot. Some of the tracks that I found over the years have been really, really interesting, where they're 17 to 19 inches long, 8 or 9 inches wide. They're in a very remote area where you wouldn't think they were put there purposefully for someone to just stumble across it.
Right.
Yeah.
And find a very series of tracks, or even in the snow, we found tracks. Talking to the eyewitnesses, that's the most compelling thing to me. I know eyewitness testimony can be skewed and people can misidentify and misinterpret and embellish, but there have been a lot of individuals I've talked to over the years that have presented some pretty interesting and compelling information on their sighting that they normally wouldn't know unless they were Bigfoot fanatics or researchers. They kind of fit what other people have told me and things that I picked up and learned about along the way. So there's things that I've seen. I've seen some really large hand cast prints that have been made and taken that are pretty compelling. And I've heard some interesting sounds. But unfortunately, nothing has convinced me 100% that the creature's real. And I don't think that's going to happen until I actually see a body for myself or actually have my own sighting.
Now, do you think you'll ever get to that point? I mean, has it gotten to where you thought maybe you were that close to getting to that point, to seeing that, being out there in the woods? I mean, if you're out there for 2 weeks and you're getting, to have some of these experiences, surely pretty soon you're gonna hit that pinnacle where you might see it. Or do you think these creatures are so smart that we won't ever be able to get irrefutable proof?
I think it's going to happen, but I don't think it's going to happen in my lifetime. I just don't. The population isn't large enough for us to really have a definitive discovery unless people start investing a lot of money in this and a lot of manpower, hours in the forest, and literally just move into the forest and stay there. That's where it's going to happen. In the hot spot, you have to be in the woods 24/7 for a long, extended period of time. And there's a few Bigfoot groups that are doing it right now, not many, but a few that are doing it. And hopefully they'll be able to produce some compelling evidence. But I don't think in my lifetime I'm going to see conclusive proof. It doesn't mean it won't happen. I just don't think it's going to happen while I'm still alive. I hope so, because it would make it all worthwhile for me, and to realize, that my half of my life has been spent just chasing a silly pipe dream.
Oh, hell yeah.
But it is what it is.
Yeah, Eric, I was wondering, you've done a lot of research on Bigfoot, so I've read up on this Mount St. Helens thing with the volcano eruption and all that stuff, and supposedly the government and firefighters had seen Bigfoots. And what's your take on that?
Well, again, those are stories, and although they're fascinating stories, there's really no proof to back them up. I know what you're talking about. There was a case supposedly where the Mount St. Helens erupted, and there were severely burned creatures that were discovered.
Yeah.
And they were taken away by the military on helicopters and transported out for safety. And no one really knows for sure. It's a story, and there is really no corroborating proof or evidence to back that story up. So it's just a story. Sure, it would be great if it were true. And it does have possibilities, because we know, Mount St. Helens did erupt, and it wiped out a vast area up there and killed a lot of wildlife and destroyed a lot of area and territory. So that's plausible, but we don't know for sure if the military came in or firefighters came in or what happened, if they really did encounter it, if it's just all made up.
Yeah.
So do you think the militaries might, or the government rather, might know more about this? Of course, that's always the possibility. Might know more about this than we do, even though you've compiled. You're probably one of the most prominent Bigfoot researchers in the country, if not in the world. And I'm sure you compiled a lot of evidence, a lot of claims, a lot of sightings and and so on and so forth. But do you think that maybe the government has